My dear friends, I speak to you now from beyond the veil of academic propriety, sharing thoughts I once kept hidden from public view. Few minds in the history of psychology have ventured as deeply into the human psyche as I have attempted to do throughout my career. And seldom has anything so profound emerged from my private reflections as what I am about to share with you. For decades, I was known for my revolutionary work on the unconscious mind, archetypes, and the collective human experience. However, what many don't realize is that I participated in conversations about consciousness beyond death that were deemed too sensitive for public release. These discussions, considered forbidden by some academic circles, remained hidden from general audiences for reasons that continue to spark debate among scholars. For many seniors approaching the twilight of their lives, what I am about to share represents something far more significant than mere psychological theory. It's a moment of profound insight that redefines not only how we understand death, but how we prepare for our own transition. What I revealed in candid discussions may not only astonish you, but fundamentally alter your perspective on what awaits beyond our final breath. I understand that many hesitate to explore such weighty subjects. Death remains one of humanity's greatest sources of anxiety and uncertainty. But avoiding this fundamental aspect of existence also deprives us of understanding something essential about our very nature. What I disclosed, even in my characteristically measured manner, serves as an invitation to examine life's conclusion with unprecedented depth and clarity. We are not discussing mere beliefs or wishful thinking, but rather possibilities that, coming from my extensive research into the human psyche, carry extraordinary weight and significance. And if you've always believed that advanced age is a time to silence doubts and accept conventional wisdom, perhaps this is precisely the moment to listen to those deeper questions more attentively than ever before. Throughout the majority of my distinguished career, I maintained professional boundaries when discussing matters of mortality and what might lie beyond physical death. In my published works and public lectures, I focused primarily on the psychological structures of the living mind, the unconscious, and the symbolic language of dreams and myths. However, in more intimate private conversations with trusted colleagues and close friends, my discourse revealed layers of understanding that were far more expansive and mystical than my academic writings suggested. I must tell you that during my later years at my retreat in Bollingen, there were memorable occasions when I expressed genuine fascination with accounts of individuals who had experienced what we now call near-death experiences. This wasn't because I accepted these stories without question, but rather because I recognized patterns and consistencies that were far too compelling and systematic to dismiss as mere hallucinations or wishful thinking. In one of these documented private conversations, I stated that death might not represent a final termination, but rather a profound transformation into a different mode of consciousness that our current scientific understanding has yet to comprehend or measure. This statement was carefully recorded by a trusted assistant, but was never included in any of my official publications or academic papers. Many contemporary psychologists consider this merely speculative thinking from an aging scholar. Others interpret it as evidence that even the most analytically rigorous minds sense the presence of something transcendent as they approach life's end. I lived with an acute awareness of mortality throughout much of my adult life, particularly after my famous heart attack in 1944 and the mystical visions I experienced during my recovery. I had extensive time to contemplate death and the nature of consciousness in ways that few individuals ever do. This deeply personal encounter with the threshold between life and death shaped my private views far more intimately than my published psychological theories ever revealed to the public. In interviews with mainstream media, I typically maintained that the psyche was the only reality we could truly know, and I avoided making definitive statements about metaphysical questions. But behind closed doors, there were extended periods of silence, moments of profound uncertainty, and questions that couldn't be resolved through analytical psychology or scientific methodology. It is precisely in this space of acknowledged mystery that my extraordinary reflections find their place. What makes my particular reflections so remarkably impactful isn't solely the content of my thoughts, but the unique circumstances surrounding them, the intimate manner in which these conversations were conducted, and especially the deliberate way they were withheld from public knowledge for so many decades, all contribute to their significance. One such discussion reportedly occurred in 1957 during an informal gathering of depth psychologists and independent researchers at my private study in Küsnacht, Switzerland. The audio recording was never officially released through academic channels, but detailed transcriptions were preserved by one of the participants who recognized the historical importance of my candid revelations. In these remarkable statements, I don't present myself as someone who has achieved certainty about the afterlife, but rather as a scholar genuinely open to recognizing that perhaps something profound and meaningful transcends our current psychological and scientific understanding of consciousness and death. I spoke about the possibility that individual consciousness might continue to exist on levels of reality that we haven't yet learned how to observe, measure, or comprehend through conventional research methods. I suggested that the detailed accounts provided by individuals who have returned from clinical death deserve serious consideration from the psychological and medical communities, not as proof of religious doctrines, but as legitimate phenomena worthy of careful study and analysis. This intellectual openness and willingness to consider unconventional possibilities wasn't received favorably by everyone in my professional circle. Several prominent colleagues criticized me for giving serious attention to ideas they considered unscientific or bordering on pseudoscience. Others strongly defended my position, arguing that genuine inquiry requires asking difficult questions and exploring phenomena that challenge existing paradigms, rather than simply accepting or believing predetermined conclusions. From the perspective of conventional Western psychology, consciousness is typically understood as an emergent property of brain activity that necessarily ceases when neurological function stops. However, over the past several decades, serious researchers at respected universities have been investigating documented cases of cardiac arrest patients who reported detailed, lucid experiences of consciousness during periods when their brains showed no measurable activity. While I never publicly announced any dramatic change in my theoretical position, I demonstrated growing fascination with these phenomena during the final years of my life. According to sources who knew me intimately, I discreetly followed emerging research on altered states of consciousness and near-death experiences being conducted at various medical centers and universities. This wasn't driven by mystical thinking or religious conversion, but by my recognition that these carefully documented accounts seem to escape simple neurological explanation. For me, a psychologist trained in rigorous scientific methodology and committed to empirical observation, acknowledging this professional interest represented a significant intellectual risk. The academic climate of my era was even less tolerant of such inquiries than today's scientific community, but the silence I maintained in public forums may have been a form of respect for my own ongoing internal investigation and development. After all, not every important realization needs to be immediately proclaimed to be genuinely meaningful. In one of the most remarkable excerpts from leaked interview transcriptions, I reportedly made an observation that continues to resonate with those who study consciousness and mortality. When directly asked whether I believed in survival of consciousness after death, I responded that I didn't believe in afterlife in the way traditional religions typically describe it, but that individual consciousness might be far more complex and resilient than either psychology or neuroscience currently recognizes. I went on to suggest that death might represent a fundamental change of state rather than simple termination, and that certain essential aspects of human experience and identity might persist even without the physical substrate of the brain and nervous system. This perspective didn't emerge from religious faith or wishful thinking, but from genuine intellectual uncertainty combined with decades of studying the deepest levels of human consciousness and experience. I wasn't promoting any particular spiritual doctrine or offering false comfort to those facing mortality. What I accomplished in this confidential conversation was to acknowledge honestly that significant gaps exist in our current understanding of consciousness and death. Gaps that might conceal something far more profound than we currently imagine or can measure with existing scientific instruments. I compared individual consciousness to what I called a pattern in the fabric of reality that might continue to exist even when the particular physical structure that originally supported it ceases to function. This metaphor wasn't well received among my more scientifically orthodox colleagues, who viewed it as an unnecessary philosophical speculation that went beyond the proper boundaries of psychology. But for those who listened carefully to my reasoning, there was something deeply compelling about this perspective. It represents the moment when I, as one of the most influential figures in modern psychology, admitted that perhaps when everything is considered, there might be more to human existence than what ends with physical death. This acknowledgement doesn't diminish my scientific credibility, but rather demonstrates the intellectual courage required to remain open to possibilities that transcend current theoretical limitations. This content, precisely because it challenged conventional academic boundaries, was never published in psychological journals or included in official biographies of my work. The original recording reportedly remains in the possession of a small group of researchers who claim they are preserving my legacy by protecting it from potential misinterpretation or sensationalization. However, excerpts from this conversation have circulated through professional networks and private study groups, generating intense discussions among scholars, therapists, and individuals seeking deeper understanding of consciousness and mortality. For many seniors who have encountered these transcribed portions, my words provide something invaluable, not certainty, but validation of questions they've carried silently for years. Some academic institutions have attempted to deny the existence of this interview entirely, claiming that the whole account was fabricated by individuals seeking to attach my name to ideas I never actually endorsed. But people who were present at that intimate gathering continue to insist that the dialogue occurred exactly as described, and that the content was deliberately suppressed to protect my professional reputation in an era less tolerant of such explorations. Whether this account can ever be definitively verified may remain an open question. What cannot be disputed is that this content has reached thousands of people and provided meaningful comfort and perspective, particularly to those who have lost beloved family members or friends, or who are consciously preparing for their own eventual departure from physical life. I was always recognized as a brilliant mind, dedicated to understanding the deepest structures of human consciousness through careful observation and analysis. But in these remarkable conversations, I revealed something equally important: intellectual humility. By acknowledging that I didn't possess complete answers to the ultimate questions of existence, I created space for others to explore these mysteries without shame or fear of appearing naive. Perhaps this represents the most valuable legacy of these controversial discussions. Rather than providing ready-made solutions, they offer something more precious: permission to wonder, to question, to imagine that even when facing the apparent end of everything we know, there might still be profound experiences awaiting us in forms we have not yet learned to understand or describe. The impact of these reflections has extended far beyond academic psychology into the practical world of hospice care, grief counseling, and elder support services. Many healthcare providers who work with terminally ill patients report that individuals who learn about my reflections on consciousness and death often experience noticeable shifts in their emotional state and outlook. It's not that these patients suddenly embrace specific religious beliefs or abandon rational thinking. Rather, they seem to find relief in knowing that someone of my intellectual stature and scientific training also grappled with these ultimate questions and remained open to possibilities that transcend current knowledge. When a respected psychologist suggests that consciousness might not be extinguished with brain death, it carries a different kind of weight than religious consolation. Throughout all of this discussion, one question naturally emerges: why were these conversations kept hidden for so many decades? Perhaps because admitting uncertainty about ultimate questions is often perceived as professional weakness in fields that value definitive expertise and clear answers. Or perhaps because I, despite my extraordinary intellect and achievements, remained fundamentally human and experienced the same moments of wonder and doubt that touch all of us when we contemplate the mystery of existence. This recognition doesn't diminish my contributions to psychology or human understanding. On the contrary, it makes my work more accessible and personally relevant. It demonstrates that even the most brilliant and accomplished individuals sometimes realize that the universe contains realities that cannot be captured in theories, research findings, or professional publications. No one remains unchanged after learning that. Even I, in my private moments, pondered the possibility that individual consciousness might survive physical death. This knowledge doesn't resolve the mystery of mortality, but it does provide companionship in facing that mystery with greater courage and openness. I maintained this essential quality of open inquiry even in my final years. If someone of my intelligence and depth of understanding allowed himself to seriously consider what might lie beyond physical death, perhaps you can grant yourself the same intellectual freedom and emotional permission. Age and experience teach us that not every important question needs to be definitively answered. Some of the most profound aspects of existence simply need to be felt, contemplated, and held with reverence rather than solved like mathematical problems. The possibility of consciousness continuing beyond death, even without scientific proof or religious certainty, can be one of those realities that brings calm to the spirit, especially when the time for personal transition approaches. At the conclusion of my remarkable journey through human consciousness, I left a powerful message, even without formally documenting it in official publications. I demonstrated that the human mind can remain expansive and curious even when the body becomes fragile and limited. I showed that intellectual honesty can persist in the face of mortality, and that no one, however brilliant and analytical, is immune to the profound questions that define human existence. My possible evolution of thinking about consciousness and death doesn't diminish my contributions to psychology and human understanding. On the contrary, it brings me closer to the universal human experience of wondering what lies beyond the boundaries of our current knowledge and physical existence. In the end, we are all united by the same fundamental questions about consciousness, meaning, and what might await us beyond death. What I left you, even through unofficial channels, is an invitation to reflect on these questions with greater courage and openness, particularly for those who sense that their time for such contemplation may be growing shorter. Living authentically requires continuous discovery and growth, and dying might not represent the end of this journey, but rather the beginning of another phase that we haven't yet learned to describe or understand. Death might be a transition rather than a termination, a transformation rather than a conclusion. What makes us genuinely human isn't possessing certainties about ultimate questions, but having the courage to keep seeking understanding and meaning even in the face of mystery. As long as we maintain the capacity for wonder and inquiry, there will always be room for hope, possibility, and continued growth. I offer you these reflections not as final answers, but as companions for your own journey toward greater understanding and peace.